this video, we're going to go over a basic workflow on how to annotate small objects. Annotating small objects is fairly similar to annotating large objects. However, these smaller objects require more attention to detail and more focus on making sure that you're not including random points inside of the label. So very similar to annotating large objects, first we'll open up camera view and just get general context about the area. Here we could see that this traffic light has 4 different traffic lights on it. There's also one street name sign, which should be labeled as traffic sign other. And the rest of this is all going to be labeled as pole. So that's enough context for this object here. Next, it helps to just hide the rest of the points. Typically, you don't have to do this unless you've already, if you've already annotated the rest of the scene, then you could just hide all of the points by double-clicking the label you want to focus on, or double-clicking unlabeled to only work on the unlabeled points. So here, this is good enough. I'm just going to annotate and focus on the pole and then the traffic signs and lights. And the next thing is just open up top-down view and just circle around the object as a whole. So if I want to just annotate the pole itself, I'm going to try to exclude these clusters of points, which are the traffic signals. And then also, when I come back around this side here, I'm going to try to exclude these points, which is the traffic sign underneath the street name sign. I'm going to make this a little bit wider as I get to the pole, because the pole is generally going to be a little bit wider than the part on the top. Again, I'm going to exclude that traffic sign there, come back around, and close off this annotation like this. So I'll press T here, exit top-down view, and just get a general understanding of what we have so far. So here again, I've excluded the points from the traffic lights as well as the traffic sign. Now, one thing to remember to do is always adjust your max point distance. If this is set fairly low, you're not going to see all of the points on the sign unless you get really close to it. So when you're working on these smaller objects, it doesn't hurt to just turn it all the way up. It's not going to affect your system too much, since the only points we're working on are the only points that are shown. So far this looks pretty decent. There's a couple of ways that you should also clean this up. Generally, you want to avoid including any noise or any atmospheric points that are floating underneath. Again, this is the same scene, so this is fairly wet points. Wet scene, so it's going to be these sparse points floating around. And then likewise, on top of the traffic signal, we want to exclude some of these points that just might not be a part of the traffic signs or the pole itself. The last thing you want to do is just also, similar to how we were working on the walls, is just go on a side view here and angle the camera in a way where you could see pretty much a side view of the object here, and you want to exclude any points that just don't belong, that are protruding too far off, and these are most likely going to be reflection points. Alright, so this is nearly where I want it to be. There's some more points on the bottom here that I don't want to include, so I'm going to trim those off. And there we have it. I think this is a decent enough place to start. So the thing I want to label this is as static road object poles. And just like that, that's essentially all you have to do. The next thing is to annotate the rest of the sign. So likewise, you could start from top-down view here. And I'm just going to circle around these points here. Including this one over here. Just so I can annotate those traffic lights. Again, trim away any points that I don't want. And we can label this as traffic light. Likewise, there's this sign here. I'm going to label this as traffic sign other. Again, if you're unsure what to label something, always check the label finder. And then it'll recommend you a label to use. And then here we could see there's still the outline of the pole, but most of this is actually just reflection because we already annotated the center mass or the center part of the pole. But all we have to do here is just trim off this last part here for this traffic sign. Again, I might need to do some refinement here, so I'm going to trim away some of these excess points. And again, if I were to open up camera view after I labeled this, we could double check. But here, that was this light here. And underneath that light, there's this pedestrian light, which should also be labeled as traffic light. So I'm going to try to find this one as well. And typically it's going to be a little bit tricky, but usually it's going to be the most dense points here. Reflection will be really close to the objects itself, but generally reflections won't be as dense as the objects. So here we can see that there's a cluster of points here. Okay, something like this. And I could trim away like that. And that looks just about right for the traffic light. Now the majority of these other points here that closely resemble the shape of the object but aren't the object itself should all be labeled as reflection. Pretty straightforward. Again, I'm just going to circle all of these points like this, at least the ones that are really close to the pole that we annotated earlier. If it's a little bit further away, it's safer to go with atmospheric, but in this case, since these are relatively close to the pole, I'm going to label those as traffic sign, or sorry, as ghost reflection. So here I have them selected. I don't want to include the ground here, so I'm just going to trim this away. Likewise here, I don't want to include any of these ground points. So just keep on trimming away. Okay. Likewise here, I don't want any of this. And even some of these points underneath, I think it's safer to label these as ghost atmospheric since they're not really close to the pole. Right, even some of this here, which might belong to the ground. And the majority of this other stuff can be labeled as ghost reflection. All right, so let me just hide all of the points except for ghost reflection, the poles, and the sign just so we can get a recap of what we've done so far. And here's what the end result will look like. Here we could see that the pole is separated out. It doesn't include any of these ghost reflection points that are close by but not actually part of the object. Likewise, we can see there's a clear separation between the traffic lights here from the pole itself, and then also a clear separation between this street name sign from the pole itself. Very common error would be to include these with the pole annotation. However, here it's really clear that these don't belong with the pole, so they should be definitely annotated separately. Hopefully this makes sense. Again, you could use the same workflow for most small objects like other poles, garbage cans, really small bushes. It helps to just go from top-down view and then slowly trim away the points you don't want, then label those other points with the respective labels. Hopefully this makes sense. We'll see.